So you're all very welcome to this Law Society practice work information session. I'm joined today by Glenn Byrne, an Irish qualified solicitor based in London, working as a legal designer with Simons and Simons LLP. Simmons and Simmons.
Yeah.
So over to you. I'll stop my share, and if anyone wants to ask a question, we'll take it on the chat, and we're hoping to have minutes at the end where we'll have a bit of a discussion. So you're very welcome, everybody. Over to you, Glenn.
Thanks. Let me know if you can see that okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So I'm going to talk today for maybe the next 30 minutes or so about legal design, which is the area in which I work, and why you should care about it. A little bit about me. So I qualified as a lawyer in Ireland into a traditional legal practice group. But I had also in university and then when training as well, been doing sort of graphic design, user experience design, things like that on the side. And I thought that that kind of area was mutually exclusive from the stuff that I did in my legal work. However, then I discovered this area, this field of legal design, and it's been a great confluence of the skills and experiences in the design side of things, but also then, of course, the training and background that I have in the legal sector as well. So I am working as a legal designer in Simmons and Simmons, which is a UK headquartered law firm, but it's got branches in a lot of different countries, including in Dublin as well. And the legal design team that I'm on sits within Wavelength, which is a sort of innovation department, a legal innovation department of this law firm. But the thing that I wanted to talk about today is what is legal design, and I kind of wanted to start at a pretty fundamental level with this and talk about what is design broadly speaking and more fundamentally speaking, and from there build into what legal design is and why it's relevant and applicable to the Irish legal sector as well. So from the work that we do, my assessment about what makes up design is essentially the function, utility, and appeal of something. So can something function for its intended purpose? Is it easy to use, or is it useful for achieving that? And is it appealing? Is it welcoming? Is it friendly? Does someone want to, or are they more inclined to use this thing? And from there, we could suggest that, you know, if you improve each of these elements, if you improve the function of something, the utility, the appeal, you can arrive at something that we would consider well designed. And if you have something that's well designed in relation to a product, you've created something that has a certain inherent value in being well designed. So, for example, with the iPhone, it functions as a smartphone, but it's also, in its development, had a strong emphasis on utility and appeal. It's easy to use, and people like to use it. It has a nice look and feel, and there's an inherent value for that product because of that well-designed nature. Then in relation to a service, if we apply those same assessments to a service, we can arrive at a service that can provide a better experience for the people who are using that service. And who is using design? Well, generally speaking, we tend to ring fence design to what we would describe as like design industries. And that would be things like UX or graphic design, product design, architecture, things like that. This is obviously a non-exhaustive list, but it seems to be the case that the reason we consider these things to be sort of design sectors is because not only do they look at the function and the utility of something, but there's a good emphasis on the appeal of something as well. So an architect working on a building needs to design a building that functions as a building, but also it needs to be useful. It needs to be easy to use for the people who are going to avail of whatever service that building is providing. And it needs to be appealing. It needs to be a space that's comfortable and welcoming for that audience or that target market. Oh. So the principal point that I'm making is that every industry and every professional services uses design to a greater or lesser extent, whether that's in relation to customer experiences, designing the layout of a retail store, or in relation to engineering works and designing a process or system, or developing a financial product for a financial institution. Each of these requires a certain levels of design decision making. Typically, we tend to prioritize the function, whether it functions, but also there can be and should be consideration of the utility and the appeal of these things as well. And the undergirding point of that is that choosing not to consider something's design is still itself a design decision. So then the next question is whether good design can be applied to law. Historically, with the legal sector, the situation has been that it is a space created by legal professionals to be understood and interacted with by other legal professionals. As a result, when non-legal professionals or people without a legal background have to interact with the legal sector, and typically they are going to be the ones most affected by the actions or decisions of the legal sector, they can find that experience confusing, intimidating, complex, costly, or time-consuming. And this can happen in relation to a large M&A deal, and it can happen to something like writing a will. It might function, it might get that person from A to B, it might solve their legal issue and get them to the end goal in the legal sector that they're trying to get to. But that does not mean that it has been an easy to use experience, nor has it been appealing to interact with the legal sector. So then how does legal design solve this problem? In our line of work, we look at a few different things. Mainly, we will look at legal information. So, for example, that can be things in like contracts, T's and C's, policies and codes, and things like that. We also look at legal processes and operations. So how does someone get from A to B in a legal process, and how can that be made more efficient or more streamlined or more effective? And then also training. So we'll help clients to train in-house counsel on how they themselves can apply these sort of more empathetic practices in their legal work to create something that is itself a little bit better designed by applying legal design ideas and thoughts and stuff like that. And we tend to break down projects into three principal stages. So the first is usually a discovery stage. So within that, we will do workshops with the potential users and try to find out what their pain points and bottlenecks are with the piece of legal information, for example. We'll run tests on that information to see objectively how accessible or understandable it is. We look at the structure of the information and see, well, has it been structured in the most efficient way, or can it be restructured in a different way? And that kind of forms the foundational research to the project. And then we move on to the design stage. And that typically involves kind of wireframing or sketching out a solution for what we're going to develop. And from there, we do a mock-up, so a little bit more meat on that. And we try to incorporate then sort of the more visual design elements of it as well. And then from there, we kind of iterate on the design with the client until eventually we've reached what we would consider to be the kind of final design for what this legal solution is going to look like. And then the last stage is sort of the delivery. So we don't just typically hand this over to the client and say, here you are, good luck. We will work with them to try to implement this in the most effective way. For example, we develop a legal solution, we work on a piece of legal information, and we'll run the tests again that we did at the start to be able to show a sort of gap analysis and to equip the people that we deal with in the client company to be able to talk to other stakeholders and their peers in their organization to be able to show and talk about the value this has brought to that piece of work. And then when we're looking at legal information, we tend to look at 4 different areas. The first would be content, and that typically involves looking at the language of something. So looking at legalistic language? Can this information be made more understandable, more readable, and more engaging? But there's a strong emphasis, of course, on making sure that we retain the sort of legal veracity of that information as well. And that's where we work in close collaboration with some of the other lawyers in those specialized areas for whichever sector that we're working with at that time. We also look at the visual design and typography. So this is a more graphic design element of things. Can this information be presented in a more effective and engaging way? Usability. So can the end user use the legal information for its intended purpose? How are they going to use it? Are they going to read this once, or is this going to form a reference document for them? And if so, how do we get them to the pieces of information that they need most efficiently? And accessibility as well. So can all the people who need to access this information, are they able to do so? For example, in the legal sector, we tend to use red, amber, green color charts, which are not very accessible for people with red, green color blindness. Or we provide documents that haven't been equipped for screen reader technology, things like that, those sorts of considerations. This is an example of a project that we worked on recently that we're able to talk about. As you can imagine, most of the stuff is kind of client confidential, but this is something we can talk about publicly, which is a code of conduct that we worked on for Standard Chartered Bank. So this is a large financial institution. They've got branches in lots of different countries. They have employees working in English and also many other different languages as well. But they had a code of conduct that was a typical sort of A4 dense text-heavy document that they felt, despite it being mandatory for employees to read, they felt that people were not reading it fully and not really implementing the code of conduct and what it was supposed to say into their own working life in the organization. So we took that away. That was the problem. And with the discovery stage, we did workshops with employees from around the organization, from different levels, from frontline staff to senior executives in different jurisdictions across different countries as well. And we did the sort of accessibility testing on the original code of conduct. We looked at the structure. We created new ways of expressing information based on the codes of conduct of their peers as well. And from that, then we moved into the design stage. So we created the wireframes, we developed a look, and this design was more visually cohesive with the look and feel of Standard Chartered's general external facing and generally internal facing brand materials and stuff like that. But also as part of the design stage, we developed a tone of voice for the code of conduct. And the purpose of that was to provide the information in a much more friendly and welcoming way. We were dealing with a document that had a lot of input from all over the organization. So we kind of centralized that into developing a tone of voice in our team that we could then implement into the code so that it retained the legal and regulatory meaning and sentiment, but it was a much more welcoming and friendly way of expressing that information. And then the delivery, we worked with them quite closely to help implement this code through their organization. And we gave them the skills and information that they needed to go to, for example, the board and talk about the value that this had brought to Standard Chartered as a whole. So why should you care? If you don't care by now, then here's a few more reasons to do so. So we find that with well-designed legal experiences, it creates a improved client experience, which has led to, or which can lead to, better relationships between lawyers and clients, customers. This has been based off the general positive feedback that we get for the work that we do with clients. It's often not something that they would expect a law firm to be able to provide. And also the emphasis on the quality of the work and the output that we create. It has kind of bolstered our relationships with some key clients, and from there we've moved into other different projects as well, and it sort of grows organically out of that. because they've had a good experience. And then similarly, they can provide a good experience with their legal information to their own customers as well. And then for the clients themselves, we find that by ensuring to the best level possible a greater level of understanding with their customers, there's a greater level of trust between the company and their customers. If customers feel like they are working on the same page as the people that they're dealing with or the organization that they're dealing with, it tends to create a more trusting relationship as well. Regulatory trends. So we've seen a lot of regulatory trends in recent times in relation to this sort of area, with the strong emphasis on customer understanding and accounting for vulnerable customers as well in relation to legal and financial information. So, for example, we've done a lot of work in the last year and a half on the Financial Conduct Authority's consumer duty in the UK, which has emphasized not only that financial institutions should create a better level of customer understanding and account for vulnerable customers, but also to evidence how they've improved that information. So that's where the kind of the processes and tools that we use comes to be very very useful for not only improving but also demonstrating improvement as well. The same sorts of emphasis can be seen in the European Accessibility Act, which of course is about improving access for products and services in a lot of different sectors, but also it accounts for improving access and understanding for financial information as well. And then this sort of stuff has been alluded to in the consultation report, I think, from the CBI in Ireland in relation to working on the Consumer Protection Code as well. Return on investment. So there's evidence to show that companies that emphasize or have a greater emphasis on design within their organization, there's a correlation between improved returns on investment, improved revenues. And also in relation to the Standard Chartered project, for example, we were able to calculate based on the fact that it was a mandatory document, but we had been able to reduce the reading time while also retaining the legal and regulatory meaning and sentiment. We were able to calculate that this returned for Standard Chartered about 25,000 hours back to their business. So there is quantifiable improvements to this sort of stuff as well. Design thinking as an approach kind of forms a basis for this sort of stuff. It's applied in a lot of different sectors, but it's a great way for identifying new opportunities. And not only is it that sort of blue sky thinking that lets you find solutions that are a little bit outside the box, but it also has an emphasis on multidisciplinary thinking. And in this way, you can bring in people with different skills and backgrounds to find solutions that would have otherwise not been identified by people working in the same sector. So, for example, we work not just with lawyers, but also with teams specialized in AI and large language models, and teams specialized in legal engineering and automation and things like that as well. And then lastly, risk reduction and proactive customer problem solving. So when you can helpfully ensure that customers have a better level of understanding of their rights and obligations with regard to the law, not only are you reducing a risk there from a lack of understanding, but also you're helping to create better customer self-serve for problems as well. So the principal point that I'm trying to make in this is that legal design can be applied to any sort of task in the legal sector, whether it's a small task or a large project. The same school of thought can be implemented and applied to make that better, to improve it in some way. It can be done by just asking questions in relation to those three areas. Does this function well? Is it as useful as possible for the intended user? And will it or can it be appealing to that user? Can it be friendly? Can it be welcoming? Can they like to use it? this last slide is just about who we are on the legal design team at Simmons, and contact information as well. So I hope there's some takeaways from that you guys will be able to apply in your day-to-day practice in law as well.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks. It's very informative and a new kind of growing area for legal design. We're open the floor to questions. So if anyone wants to ask a question, we'll take it on the chat. But one of the questions I had was that seems to be for bigger companies, but how, if I'm a smaller practice, might I adopt some of this legal design thinking to improve my clients' experience of the firm? Like, do I need to reformat all of my documentation? Look at my,
No, not necessarily. I mean, we given the space that we work in, we tend to work with bigger companies, but the same ideas can be applied to smaller firms as well. It's just about taking the extra steps to be more empathetic about who's going to be receiving and using that information. So there's no special software you need. There's no special skills that you need. We work with lawyers most of all, so we're kind of working within the parameters of what they can do and what tools and softwares and platforms they have access to. And all of that can be done at a smaller level as well, with working with individual clients too. So is the language of what you're providing, is it as understandable as possible? And have you accounted for the background, or have you put yourself in the shoes of the person who's receiving that information and made it as empathetic, as useful, and potentially as appealing as it could possibly be, really.
And why do you think legal design is growing so much? And what have you seen in the London market that maybe we could learn from in the Irish market around legal design and its execution?
I think why it's growing, well, it kind of kicked off in the US a few years ago, but it's really taken off in the private sector in Europe, and I think South America tend to be the bigger markets for this sort of stuff. I think it's growing because not only of some of the incentives that I talked about, but also a kind of general cultural shift for businesses and professional services to be more considerate and more human-centric about the work that they do for their customers and for the end users as well. And that cultural shift has led to that sort of regulatory shift or regulatory trend that we're seeing, that's kicked off in the UK, that is in train in Europe, and tends to be coming down the tracks in Ireland as well. Some of the learnings from London, I think the fact that but what I said about not needing special software or skills or anything like that, this is an area of legal innovation that anybody can do. You don't need a specific background in a specific discipline to be able to be innovative with this sort of stuff. But it also acts as a good bridge, I think, between the sorts of different disciplines that could be useful to law and how they can be useful to law. So there can be a bit of a gap sometimes between people working in different sectors and people who are working as lawyers. But with legal design, you kind of take a bigger picture, you apply design thinking, and with that, you can kind of see the kind of connections and how these things can be useful within the legal sector. And you can do that in a way that is most easily understood, applied, and most functional for the lawyers and for the end users as well.
Have you seen any sort of reluctance of adoption on the basis that, like, some solicitors can be reluctant to sort of get involved in sales and marketing for regulatory issues, or just general, how would you say, sales and marketing is not for us, being blunt about it? Have you seen a greater adoption in the UK market than maybe in the Irish market? Or?
I don't think there's been, in the Irish market, I don't think it's necessarily reluctance, to be honest. I think it's the fact that this sort of stuff hasn't really reached the general legal sector consciousness in the same way. Like, we are still explaining this concept to people in the UK market as well sometimes. And some people can be great ambassadors for this sort of thing, and they can really take it and run with it. Other people, it takes a bit more explaining. Sometimes the proof is in the result. So you show what you've done and how you've done it, and that really convinces people to see the value in it. But I think, to be honest, it's a question of when rather than if, both in the UK market, when it really kind of permeates legal practice here, and also in the Irish market when it kind of really takes off and people start asking these questions, making these considerations in their general legal practice.
And if I was a smaller practice or a bigger practice, but we weren't really thinking like this, what do you think are the best sort of next steps we might take? You say that obviously you don't need specialized software resources, but do I need to do a course, or is there a particular magazine I could go and read, or how could I educate myself better and see them?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sources from all over, to be honest, because I didn't come into this space with a particular qualification in legal design. It was complementary. It was complemented by the legal training and also some experience in design and graphic design and things like that. I think coming at it as a lawyer, you already have the skills to be more empathetic in the information that you provide. So with the work that we do in looking at content and language, it's probably best described as sort of reverse engineering the way lawyers speak. You're really getting into the weeds about what certain words, certain phrases mean, seeing, are those the most understandable and accessible terms? Is there an alternative? Does that still retain the same meaning? And does the overall point, is that still being made effectively within the law? But all of that analysis is the stuff that you learn to do sort of in the opposite direction when you're training as a lawyer as well. So there's just a sort of a complement of all of the things you know as a lawyer or as a legal professional. And then the extra steps involved are just putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's going to be using it and trying to see, well, have I accounted for that in the most effective way?
There's a couple of questions there on the chat. I know we're kind of nearly running out of time, but have you come across the use of a paywall behind which clients or potential clients must pay for or sign up to in the use of legal design?
No, we haven't really interacted with a paywall in that way. The work that we do it's all client facing, and we are a practice group. So we work and practice in the same way as the other lawyers in the firm, and kind of bill and charge in that way as well. So that's typically how that works.
And does this feed into better use of practice management software internally too, better design or workflows?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So some of the stuff that we work on is it could be described as legal operations as well, but the same schools of thought are applied here. So we will and have helped clients look at practice management and apply design thinking to help with that. For example, we've helped clients with figuring out a better, more efficient process and practice management system in relation to the explosion of queries and questions that they had on AI and large language models in the last year, because they operated in the tech sector. So, sometimes we can go into those situations and apply that discover stage to find the problems, the pain points, and then from there work out a new process and work out a better practice management and consult and advise on how to implement that most effectively.
So a question there about the types of projects that you take on, like streamlining contracts, e.g. a SaaS company suite of customer onboarding documents, or is it limited to policies, codes of practice?
We don't really limit ourselves to the types of documents that come in. We talk generally about legal information. That can take the form of a code that I talked about. It can take the form of, for example, legal financial information used on company websites. Because we take this staged but also broad area approach to the projects, we haven't limited ourselves to saying that we only look at terms, conditions, or codes, or things like that. But by and large, that tends to be the types of legal information that we're looking at most frequently.
And then lastly, then there's a question there around plain English, and how does all this fit in with the plain English campaign interacting with legal design?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Like, plain English is a growing trend. It's a great aim. We say that what we're doing is in the direction of plain English, but there's that added element of making sure that the legal meaning and regulatory meaning is still there. So it's kind of applying that school of thought to the legal sector in a way that's specific to the requirements of law as well.
Very good, very good. Listen, Glenn, we're kind of out of time. It's just gone 1:30. So unless you have a final thing to add, if you want to, if they want to get in contact with you, we're going to share your slides out with the recording later in the week. And our next session is on April 24th, and we're joined by Anya Hines, and we're going to be doing an update on EPA's enduring powers of attorneys and what's happening in that space at the moment. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks, Glenn, for all your information today, and
thank you very much.
On the 24th. Thank you.
Cheers.
Slán agus gur mágad.